Hey guys, how's it going? Kevin Cleary here with a knife video for you. Today is my full review and discussion of the Ruike P155. This is a much requested video. A lot of you have been very interested in this knife, have really wanted to get your hands on one, have asked me what I thought of it. In fact, not only once I had it, but before I ever got it, people were sending pictures and asking me what I thought of it. So finally, here we go. The first thing I want to say is thank you to Ruike Knives Canada who sent this along. If you're going to buy one, go over to Ruike Knives Canada and buy it from them. They support the channel by sending me this stuff, which in turn benefits you because now you can find out if it's a good knife or not. And of course, by sending traffic over there, you know, they go, hey, when we send Kevin stuff, it works really well for us. And so big thank you to Ruike Knives Canada. Thank you also for those of you who participated in the giveaway with Ruike Knives Canada that ended at the end early. Wow, ended at the first of this month, I'm sorry. That giveaway is done, and I will announce the winner when we get to the comparison portion because I'm actually going to use the knife that's being given away in this video. Okay, so now that we've got all that out of the way, let's look at the size and weight. Oh, just if I didn't say it, I'll say it one more time. Link to Ruike Knives Canada down in the description, and if you're going to buy one of these, please go there and buy it. Size and weight, 8 7/16 overall, 3 9/16, so that's a little over 3.5 inches on the blade length. 4 15/16 is the closed dimension there, and that's a little under 5 inches. Finally, this guy is just over 1/2 inch thick and weighs in at 5.1 ounces. All right, in terms of carry, I found this very comfortable to carry, but I'm not very sensitive about that, guys. I carry, you know, all kinds of stuff that weighs up to 7-8 ounces and don't really bat an eyelash about it. So if you're really sensitive and you're like, no, the knife I carry must be under 4 ounces and it must be under 3/8 of an inch thick and on, you know, this probably isn't going to be for you. But I think most of us are, you know, fairly, especially if you're a regular on my channel, you know, you like larger knives and you know they're gonna weigh a little bit more. All right, let's talk about the blade here. This is, of course, a Persian style blade, and we'll talk about the knife design when we get down to the handle design. But yeah, Persian style blades generally are pretty good in terms of utility. I know they're not designed initially for utility, but the fact is that's what we care about. If you're gonna carry an EDC knife, it's gonna be carried as a tool. And this one works really well. It's nice and thin behind the edge, 22 thousandths. It's 135 thousandths stock, so this slices like crazy. 14 C28N blade steel is a great budget blade steel. I would dare say the best budget blade steel, and I wish some of the other companies would be switching to it. I guess Ruike probably doesn't want that to happen because right now, you know, you go to Ruike or you go to Real Steel and you get a better steel. So that's one of the big selling points from them over most of the American brands, okay? So 14 C28N is great steel. Really, my one and only complaint about this blade is the bead blasted finish, which I just don't find attractive. And of course, it has the added issue of creating a greater potential for corrosion. And I feel like, you know, why would you do that? Just make it a satin finish, make it a stonewash finish that is going to look much nicer and be a little less prone to rusting. Anyway, Ruike seems to really like the bead blasted finish, sort of like Kershaw of the early 2000s. Maybe eventually they'll move away from that. I kind of hope they do. All right, so that's really my only complaint about the blade is the fact that it's got that bead blast finish. I don't absolutely hate it, okay? I would prefer just about any other finish to the bead blasting. Otherwise, great blade. And of course, the bead blasting doesn't affect the utility of this knife. And so it's a highly, highly useful cutting tool, all right, with this particular blade design, which is pretty typical of Persian style blades. What about lockup and deployment? Well, this is a liner lock. It does have this secondary lock in the back, which can be annoying sometimes. I find if I'm using this for any length of time, just my thumb randomly moving around will eventually click that lock. And now when I go to unlock the knife, I'm like, why won't this close? And I'm like, oh yeah, the secondary lock. I've never bothered to, you know, disable a secondary lock. It's not all that difficult to do. I don't know, just doesn't feel like it's worth the time for me. I just try to remember that it's there and not turn it on. Otherwise, the lockup and deployment on this is quite good. The liner is easy to access. The action is very smooth. The detent is right where you'd want it to be for either the thumb stud or the flipper. Now, a number of you have indicated that you would like this knife better if it didn't have a thumb stud, or at the very least, if it kind of picked one or the other. And honestly, guys, I get it. I understand that you kind of, it makes the knife a little more simplistic, and perhaps you could try to argue the thumb stud takes away from the overall look a little bit. I don't find it to be that big of a deal. My main concern, especially as a reviewer, is do both work well? And they both really do. So the other side of that, whether it should be just a thumb stud or just a flipper, that's a pretty subjective thing. I don't mind it having both, but I understand why some of you may say, oh, I wish this was just a flipper or just a thumb stud. I don't really have a strong opinion on that. All I can tell you is the action is very nice. It's smooth and everything works the way that you want it to, and does so quite comfortably, which that's something I do care about, right? Is the flipper tab comfortable? Is the thumb stud accessible? Do I feel like I'm gonna wear my fingers out using it? And the answer is no. This is very comfortable, very easy to use, and very smooth. Bearing pivot in here, I won't rehash that discussion fully, but yeah, a bearing pivot does mean that in certain scenarios, I don't know if you're drywalling or rolling in sand pits outside, yes, stuff could get into that bearing and you're going to have to clean it out. You could blow it out with some forced air and spray some WD-40 in there and you'll probably get most of it. If you need to take this down, rake knives are pretty easy to take down. I've never had a problem with one. So yeah, you can take it down, clean everything up, and then put it back together. Bearings do introduce that issue of maintenance. So it's up to you whether or not you side with bearings or washers. Again, I kind of use them situationally. If I know I'm going into a scenario where there's going to be dirt and grime and the potential for dust, then I'll take a knife that has washers. All right, that's my solution. You may have a different one of your own. So lockup and deployment, quite good. What about handle construction? Well, this is a fairly standard handle construction from rake knives. We've seen a few stainless steel liner locks with G10 backspacers, mill G10 handles. This is not an uncommon method of construction. There are a couple things though that are worth noticing. Of course, the see-through pivot is interesting, along with the see-through back screw. Single position clip is obviously worth noting. We'll get to some ergonomic points in a second. The one thing I want to point out about the construction is that I like the fact that this is a fairly robust liner, that it's pretty confidence inspiring, and overall everything is quite solid. And there's the only sort of, if you look at this, you can see it's maybe not perfectly flush, but honestly, this is not something that even registers to me. So, what about ergonomics? Well, like virtually every Persian style blade, the ergonomics are fantastic. I've said this about the Talwar, I've said it about the 0462, and I'll say it about this. They just mold into your hand wonderfully. And that makes sense for, you got to keep in mind that their initial purpose was it was like a fighting dagger. Okay, they work well in a folding design because the upswept blade kind of matches the angled handle. So, a number of companies have done folders of this style, and they always work well and they're always comfortable in hand. The trade-off is, okay, everyone in the general public sort of recognizes this as like a fighting knife. Okay, this is a knife for using against people, and they may or may not understand your explanation of, hey, well, it's true that these were initially designed for that role. Okay, the fact is that this design is extremely comfortable, and this blade shape with that really nice belly is extremely useful. By the way, thinking of ergonomics, this does work as a finger choil for doing, sort of more detailed work. And I've got to say that is true of all of the knives in this shape that I've really handled. They all tend to be very comfortable, and it's a useful shape for sure. Now, I do have to say this. I often get questions about why, Kevin, this is a knife that has that tactical sort of weapon look. I'm doing some quotes here. I wanted you to see, but I guess you won't. Why don't you review it as a weapon? And the reason is, really, any knife that has a substantial blade length and is fairly grippy is going to work as a decent weapon, all right? But the reality is that for 99.9% of the population, literally 100% of your use of your folding knife is going to be as a tool. All right, there are very few people in very few situations who will ever need a cutting tool to use as a weapon. All right, it just is very, very rare. And so if you're carrying a knife to be primarily a weapon, I feel like, one, there are lots of better options out there. Two, you've you've made your choice based on the thing you never use your knife for. Okay, it would be like me buying a vehicle that was great for towing. I never tow anything. Okay, the one time in the last 5 years that I've had to tow something, my vehicle worked fine for that very limited, space when I was doing it. Otherwise, I never use it for that. So it's like, okay, so that's why I rarely talk about a folding knife as a weapon, because the fact is, if it only works as a weapon, it's not a very good EDC knife, all right? And that's primarily what I consider when I'm doing these reviews. I have done some reviews that are about a knife that is basically just a weapon and reviewed it as such, but then I often qualify that by saying, if you need an EDC knife, don't buy this. Buy something that is useful for what you're going to use your knife for. All right, I may get some feedback on that. I'm welcome, or I would welcome any feedback you want to give along those lines. But that's my thinking on, and my answer to those of you who've asked, why don't you review it as a weapon? Well, because no one's ever going to use it for that. All right, so let's finally get to our comparisons. Now that I've said the handle is well put together and extremely comfortable, which is what you would expect from a Persian style blade, are there some other knives out there that are worth comparing this to? And my answer is absolutely. Let's bring in the first one, since it fits one of the other purposes I have for this video. This is another Ruike knife. This is the P158. And this is another great model from Ruike, perhaps my favorite model from them, which is why when we're going to do a giveaway, I requested it. So this is going to, hold on, I wrote his name down here, Alvin Jackson. Alvin, I will send you a message. Perhaps I'll send you a message, but I'm just going to drop this in the mail. I've got your address and I'm going to send it to you. So whether you see my message or not, you'll eventually know that you won this knife because it's going to show up in your mailbox. But this is a great comparison. Notice you get a little more cutting edge. It's a little bit heavier, but it is also thinner in pocket. So that's another Ruike knife that you may want to pick up, again, from Ruike Knives Canada. Let me throw in a couple of others here. Of course, when we talk about budget liner lock knives, you really have to talk about the Rat Model 1. Of course, this knife, and I've got one more that I thought I'd bring in just because I wanted to give you a couple of examples of knives that have good action but don't have bearings. This is the Benchmade Freak, recently returned to me. So I bought this Freak, reviewed it, loved it, sold it, and traded it back for something else. So this is actually the original Benchmade Freak that I purchased, and it's now back in my collection. Both of these are great examples of, excellent EDC knives that don't have bearings, but still have absolutely perfect actions. Now let's bring in some bearing knives. This guy is from Artisan Cutlery. I've got some other, I tried to bring in some overseas companies here that would kind of fit the bill in terms of comparing like to like. So this is the Artisan Cutlery Shark. Decent action on this guy, liner lock. This is not quite as refined, honestly, as this knife is. Here we have another knife. This comes in at a slightly higher price point. This is the Bestech Paladin. Slightly nicer action, a little stiffer detent. Similar in design language, okay? Both of these, I would say, look a little scary. This is more of a Quaken style than a Persian style, but there's a lot of similarity here, okay? So the Bestech, again, is a liner lock. It's got a great action. It's got great deployment, and it has a little bit of a scary look to it that may be off-putting to some. What I love about this is look at that beautiful satin finish. That's really, I think, where that knife shines. Finally, let's bring in the Civivi Aquila. This is going to be a little bit more expensive. The steel is going to be VG10, which is really going to perform very similarly to 14C28N. You are going to pay a little more for it. But I'm really bringing this in as a representative because there are some great Civivi knives out there that you may want to look at, which are going to have, bearings and all of that stuff, okay? So let's get those out of the way. Those are the comparisons, similar mostly in price, and certainly all of those I would kind of class as EDC style knives like this one. And perhaps some of them aren't quite as dramatic as this one is going to be. What are my overall thoughts, guys? Do I like it? Do I recommend it? Absolutely, I like this knife. It's extremely comfortable. It cuts really well. And, you know, that's what you want in a knife. That's literally what it's supposed to do, be comfortable in hand and cut well. That said, the only issue that's going to be off-putting to me and possibly to some of you is the fact that, yeah, if you open this in public, this may be a little scary to some people because of that upswept tip. It just makes the knife look a little more, you know, to use a Nick Shabazz-ism, it looks a little murdery. I kind of think that's a silly word, but it does look a little scarier than some other options, especially like the ones that I just finished showing you, with some exceptions. So yeah, great knife, well put together. You know, cuts and performs as you would want it to. Extremely comfortable ergonomically. Some interesting features like a really nice action, the see-through screws. There you go. That's my thoughts. If this is a style that you like and that you can get away with, hey, I don't think you'll be disappointed in this knife whatsoever. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. We will talk to you soon.